Bright day, everyone. In this juncture, we'll be discussing about the effect of globalization in the U.S. economy. First, we have the trade and openness. In many small countries like Singapore and Germany, trades like exports or imports makes up a very large share of their gross domestic products because they rely heavily on international markets. In contrast, as you can see on the bar graph here on the left side, the US has a huge domestic market, so trade is only about 26.9% of their gross domestic products on 2022. Instead of exporting mainly goods, the US economy leans on services and technology exports like softwares, finance, and patents. This means that US is a less trade-dependent than smaller export-driven economies. Next we have here is the capital and investment. The US is the world's largest destination for foreign direct investment, or the FDI, attracting $311 billion in 2023. So we have here the bar graph on the right side. So foreign companies and investors put money into advanced industries like technology. We have here the Silicon Valley, AI, and semiconductors. Finance like Wall Street, and banking. High-end manufacturing, aerospace, biotech, and advanced machinery. This investment makes the US a hub for innovation and home for too many global corporate headquarters. Next, we have the distributional node. The US has a high GDP per person and strong financial markets, showing overall wealth and economic strength. However, not everyone benefits equally from globalization, like skilled workers, like we have here the engineers, tech professionals, financiers, and capital owners, or the shareholders, big investors, gain the most. Lower skilled workers see fewer benefits, which leads to economic or income inequality. In short, globalization grows the US economy, but the rewards are unevenly shared.
The economy of India is a developing mixed economy with a notable public sector in strategic sectors. India's economy is still growing and is a mix of private businesses and government involvement, especially in important areas. This means the country is getting richer, and both regular companies and the government help make it happen, focusing on industries that are key for the country's future and safety. It is the world's fourth largest economy by nominal GDP and the third largest by purchasing power parity, or PPP. On a per capita income basis, the India ranked 136th by GDP on nominal and 119th by GDP on PPP. India is one of the biggest economies in the world when you look at how much money makes it. But if you divided that money by the number of people, each person doesn't have as much compared to people in other rich countries. This shows that some people in the India are much richer than others. From interdependence in 1947 until 1991, successive governments followed the Soviet model and promoted protectionist economic policies with extensive Sovietization, state intervention, demand-side economics, natural resources, enterprises, and economic regulation. This is characterized as dirigism in the form of the license Raj. From the India became independent until 1991, the government used ideas from the Soviet Union to control the economy. They tried to protect Indian businesses from foreign competition and had the government run many things. This meant that government decided what to make, how much to charge, and make it hard for new businesses to start. The license Raj means as an old way of running things because you needed a license for almost everything. It was hard to start a business, and it led to problems like people having to bribe government officials to get things done. The end of the Cold War and an acute balance of payments crisis in 1991 led to the adoption of a broad economic liberalization in India and indicative planning. Around 1991, things changed because India had a money problem and the Soviet Union fell apart. So the India started opening up its economy, letting businesses have more freedom and inviting foreign companies to invest. India has about 1,900 public sector companies, with the Indian state having complete control and ownership of railways and highways. Even though India has opened up its economy, the government still owns about 1,900 companies, including the railways and highways. This means that the government still plays a big role in some important parts of the economy. The Indian government has major control over banking, insurance, farming, fertilizer and chemicals, airports, and essential utilities. The government has a lot of control over things like banks, insurance companies, farming, and airports. They make rules and decide how these industries works because they are important for everyone's well-being. The state also exerts substantial control over digitalization, telecommunication, supercomputing, space, port and shipping industries, which are effectively nationalized in the mid-1950s but has seen the emergence of the key corporate players.
Bright day everyone, my name is Ryan E. Barba. I will be discussing the U.S. government and how it affects globalization. Allow me to discuss briefly the U.S. government. The U.S. is a federal constitutional republic made up of 50 states and one federal district, Washington, D.C. It operates under a system designed to balance power and protect democracy. The U.S. is a country made up of 50 states and a capital area called Washington, D.C. It follows a rules, a constitution, that makes sure power is shared fairly to keep democracy strong. Each state, like California or Texas, has its own laws but follows the U.S. Constitution. Next, we have the three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. First, let's tackle the legislative. Legislative is a Congress. They compose of Senate and House. They create laws. Next one is the executive. President and administration enforce laws, while the judicial belongs to the Supreme Court and lower courts interpret laws and ensure constitutionality. Checks and balances maintain a separation of powers. How it works. They'll work together because Congress passes a law, the President approves it, and if someone thinks the law is unfair, the Supreme Court can review it. Role of states in national unity. States retain sovereignty over matters not given to federal government, each with its own government structure. The name United States of America reflects this union of sovereign states under one national government. States have their own governments and control some things themselves, but they also work together under the national government, which unites all the states. States like New York can create laws for schools in that state, but they all belong to the United States and follow federal too. International role of the federal government. The federal government manages foreign affairs and participates in organizations like the UN, United Nations, NATO, and World Trade Organization, influencing global trade, security, and cooperation, which drives economic interdependence worldwide. The U.S. government deals with other countries, works with groups like the United Nations, and helps with world trade and safety. The U.S. participates in NATO to work with other countries on military defense and peace. I hope you learned something from my discussion. Thank you for listening.
Now let us move on to the governance of the India and the effect of the globalization to this sector. So the India's government system is based on a federal parliamentary republic, which means that the power is divided between the central government and the state, while the executive is accountable to the legislature. Formally, the president is the head of the state, but the real political authority lies within the Prime Minister and the Council of the Minister. The India's governments also rests in three key branches, which is the executive, which implements the policy, the legislature, which makes the law, and the judiciary, which ensures that the laws are applied fairly and in accordance with the Constitution. So, a major step towards making governance more participatory was the 73rd and the 74th constitutional amendments of 1992, which gave the constitutional status to Panchayatira institutions and urban local bodies. So these reforms empowered citizens and at the grassroots levels, making governance more inclusive and more democratic. Before the 1990s, Indian government was characterized by what is often as the license Ra. So this system gave the government extensive control over economic activity, requiring license and approvals for industry to operate or expand. So this approach was protectionist, aiming for self-reliance after independence. So tariffs were high and imports were restricted, and foreign investment was limited. So in practice, however, this created inefficiency and widespread corruption. So the businesses spent more time navigating bureaucracy rather than focusing on productivity and innovation. So while the system ensured that the government had tight control over the economy, it stifled competition, slowed economic growth, and left governance heavily centered on regulation rather than facilitation. So here in the graph, as we can see, before the 1991, the Indian state was the dominant provider. However, as the rise of the globalization, the role of the private sector and global actors are steadily increases while the state shifted to a more regulatory role. So in 1991, the India faced a balance of payment crisis so severe that it had to seek assistance from the International Monetary Fund or IMF. So in response, the governance introduced wide-range economic reforms known as liberalization, privatization, and globalization, or the what we call now LPG reform. So licensing requirements for industry were drastically reduced, giving businesses more freedom to operate. Privatization allowed the private sector to play a greater role in areas previously dominated by the state owned enterprises. At the same time, globalization opened India's economy to foreign direct investment and international trade. So these challenges redefined governance, shifting the role of the state away from being a controller of economic activity to becoming a regulator and facilitator, supporting competitiveness and innovation in line with the global standards. So, post global reforms after the 1991, the India's governance adapted to globalization through major reforms. So, in 2015, the Planning Commission was replaced by NITI Aayog, which was designed to promote cooperative federalism and evidence based policy. So, this change signaled a move away from rigid centralized planning towards more collaborative policymaking with the states. So another milestone was Right to Information Act of 2005. This gave the citizens the legal rights to demand information from the government, dramatically improving transparency and accountability. The digital India initiatives transformed governance by introducing e-government platforms, online service delivery, and biometric identity systems like Aadhaar. This made government service more efficient and accessible, especially in rural areas. So private partner public-private partnership also became central in infrastructure, healthcare, education. This reflects how governance now involves collaboration between state and non-state actors. The effects of the globalization on governance. So the globalization deeply influenced the Indian governance in both structure and practice. So one key effect is the rise of the competitive federalism, where Indian state actively compete one another to attract domestic and foreign investment by improving policies, infrastructure, and ease of doing businesses. The governance also become more citizen-centered. As people now expect efficiency, accountability, and faster delivery of service, the influence of non-state actors such as NGOs, civil society groups and private sectors and even international organizations grew stronger in policymaking. So this means that the governments in the India is no longer confined to government institution alone, but has become more participatory and collaboratively. Additionally, India's government is increasingly shaped in global practices, adapting international models to fit domestic needs. So while the globalization in India brought opportunities, it also revealed the persistent governance challenges. The corruption continues to undermine institutions, eroding public trust in government. Even well-framed policies often fail because of weak enforcement and poor monitoring at the implementation stage. Center-state tensions are another recurring issue upon the rise of the globalization, with the conflicts over resources distribution, taxation, and differing political priorities, creating friction in governments. Furthermore, the globalization has widened inequalities, so the urban areas and developed states benefited more from the reforms, while the rural regions lagged behind. So this imbalance between urban and rural India adds pressure on governance system to ensure equity and social justice. So as you can see here in the graph, this shows the comparisons where the globalization transformed governance in multiple ways. So as you can see here, the blue states the blue states the state after the globalization. Then the red is the effects of the globalization on the state before the globalization. This comparison makes it clear the globalization transformed governance in multiple ways. So the state's direct control weakened, but the transparency, the accountability, and the competitive federalism expanded. At the same time, new vulnerabilities and governance challenges also emerges upon the rise of the globalization. So, what are the strategies and responses that the India implemented to address the challenges from the rise of the globalization? So, to address this issue, the India governance implemented a number of governance strategies. So, first is the decentralization that has given local governments greater authority, making governance more responsive at the community level. Next is the e-governance initiatives, including the Adahar and the digital service platforms. They have streamlined government processes and improved accessibility. So the transparency measures such as RTI Act and the and the establishment of the Lukpal institutions aim to reduce the corruptions and hold the officials accountable. At the same time, India has increased its participation in the international forums like WTO, the BRICS, and the G20, ensuring the voice is heard in shaping global governance. So these measures reflect the NGO's governance dual approach, strengthening the governance and at home while actively engaging with the global order. At the end, the globalization has reformed India governance by encouraging reforms that promote transparency, efficiency, and competitiveness. So, in institutions like NTI Ayog, laws like RTI Act, and initiatives like Digital India illustrate how the governance has modernized in response to global pressure. However, upon the rise of the globalization and with the strategies that has been implemented, challenges still remains. The corruptions, weak implementation, center-state conflicts, and social inequality continue to hinder the process. The task ahead is to balance efficiency with accountability and equity, ensuring that the governance not only meets global standards but also delivers social justice and inclusive development for all citizens.
The effect of globalization in US in terms of culture. The positive effects. Number one, cultural diversity. Exposure to diverse cultures, traditions, and cuisine has enriched American society. So this means that people from many different countries live in the US. So this brings a mix of cultures, traditions, and foods that makes life more interesting and exciting. Number two, global exchange. Americans can engage with people from different cultures, fostering understanding and collaboration. So this means that the global exchange is American can meet and talk with people from other countries, and this help everyone learn from each other and work better together. Next, number three, access to global entertainment. U.S. citizens can enjoy international music, movies, and art. So the access to global entertainment makes people in the US can enjoy music, movies, and art from all over the world. So not just in US. So this gives more choices and new experiences. Bright day everyone, I am Hazel Aiko, and this time I will talk about the effects of globalization on Indian culture. So globalization means the world is becoming more connected and it has both positive and negative impact on India. Let us discuss first the positive impacts. First, we have the cultural exchange. So, ang mga tao sa India can learn and experience different traditions from across the world, and it makes India more connected and open sa mga new ideas. So, next is economic growth. Because of global business and trade, damo nga mga jobs ang na-create sa India, and it helps improve the living standards sa mga tao dito sa India, which means they can have a better quality of life. Next is tradition recognition. So, ang mga festivals sa India like Diwali and Holi are now celebrated sa mga damo ng countries. And mas na-appreciate na ang Indian culture sa mga tao worldwide than before. Next is the negative effects. So number one is the cultural homogenization. American culture is dominating global media, potentially threatening local cultures. So American movies, music, fashion are so popular around the world that other local cultures might start disappearing or changing to be more like American culture. Number two, loss of traditional values. Increased exposure to global influences may lead to erosion of traditional American values. This means that when people in the US see and follow ideas from other countries, so they might start forgetting or moving away from their own old tradition and values. Last, number three, cultural appropriation. Adoption of cultural practices without proper understanding or respect can be problematic. So this means that sometimes people use part of another culture like clothing, music, or foods without really understanding or showing respect. So this can hurt or upset people from the culture. So next, we have the negative impacts. First is the family changes. The traditional joint family system where more generations live together is now becoming less common. Instead, ang mga smaller nuclear families with just the parents and the children, amo na lang nasusubong ang usual. Next is the Western influence. So, ang mga young people sa India are adopting Western habits, which sometimes means nga ang mga Indian customs and traditions ginakalimtan na nila or hindi na importante sa ila. Lastly is the language shift. So, English is becoming more popular, especially sa mga cities. And ang mga Indian local languages, hindi na siya magamit and much even worse, malimtan na siya over time.
So, bright morning everyone. So, I am Samuel Botcon and I will be discussing about the effects of globalization in terms of peace in America. So, first, let's discuss the positive impact in terms of peace in America. So, first, economic growth. Access to global markets boosts trade, investments, and job opportunities. So, syempre, kay ang Amerika is dako siya nga state, dako siya nga country, and may ara sila kwarta. So, they invest businesses all over sa ila nga country. And because damo companies ang nag-rise up or ang damo companies ang mga gatubo, so damo man opportunities para makakita obra ang mga tao dito. Next is culture exchange. Exposure to diverse cultures enriches America's society through food, music, films, and tradition. So, given nga grabe ang mga pagkaon dito sa Amerika, so mayara man mga foods, films man nga ila gina-enjoy. So, ang pagkabalo sa lain-lain nga kultura nagapadamo sang ideya kag naghatag sang kalipay sa ilang syudad sang Amerika. So paagi sang pagkaon, musika, mga films kag tradisyon nila. So amo na kay syempre dako ang Amerika, it's consist of 50 states. So different states may ara man different tradition and culture. So next is innovation technology. Global collaboration speeds up research, technology development, and sharing knowledge. So, ang pagbuligay sang lain-lain nga states sa Amerika, so dako gid ang impact sa ila, no? Kay sa madali nga research. So, hapos lang sa ila mag-research kay syempre binuligay sila. Ang pag-advance ang ila mga teknolohiya kag maka-gain sila more knowledge sa ilang mismo lang nga country. So that's the positive impact. So next is the negative impact. So job outsourcing. Many US companies move production overseas, reducing local manufacturing job. So kay tungod gusto nila mapadako ang ilang production, so damo kumpanya sa US ang naga-silo sang ilang produksyon. Meaning na ang inibig nga company matukod naman sa iban nga country. For example, matukod sila sa diri sa Asia sa aton. So ang ila produksyon ari na di. So amo na nabuhinan ang ilang mga obra pang manufacturing sila mismo nga country. So next is the income inequality. Wealth often concentrates in corporation and elites, leaving many workers behind. So kaysa Amerika, damo na nga dagko nga kumpanya kag mga tawo nga may mga posisyon na, so dako ang ilang mas dako ang ilang sweldo, dako ang ila income. Syempre ang ara sa gamay nga mga companies hindi makaginansya sang dako kay kumbaga do ginagitkeep na nila ang mga tawo magbakal sa ila na lang. So syempre ang kumpanya nga gamay hindi na equal bala ang ilang income. So labi pa sa mga trabahante lang, so gamay gid ang ang sweldo or ang income sang gamay nga kumpanya. So inequal gid to ang ilang income. So next is the last one is the cultural homogenization. So local traditions and values risk being overshadowed by global consuming culture. So amo na sa ang pag-aangat sa Amerika may mga negatibo man nga effect. Amo na ang pag-amat-amat dula sang ila local nga tradisyon. Kaya mas gina-prioritize pa nila ang pagbakal sa mga produkto sang lain nga nation. So nagkakadula ang pag-support nila sa ila mismo nga produkto. Kag ano man arang makabakal sa produkto, syempre may mga bago sila nga kilala sa ibang nga country. So ang ila mindset maglain man. So nagakadulaan na support ang Amerika sa ila local nga produkto. So more on gid sila, more on what you call this, more on kakwa gid sila balasang ilang product sa ibang nga lugar. So amo lang na ang akon ma-share. Thank you everyone.
The effects of globalization in terms of peace in India. First is the economic interdependence. Foster stability through shared economic interest. As India integrates more deeply into global supply chains and attracts foreign investments, which can cause economic stability. Next, enhanced governance. Strengthens institutions and promotes rule of law. Globalization pushes India to strengthen ang ilang institution to meet the international standards for trade, investments, and human rights. So this includes things like improving the efficiency of the legal system, which reduced corruption. Dialogue and cooperation creates avenues for conflict resolution through global norms. India's active participation in the international forum like the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and other organizations provide platforms for dialogue and cooperation with other countries. So, ang karing engagement can help to resolve conflict and build trust. Rising inequality widens the gap between rich and poor, causing unrest. One of the big challenges of globalization is that it can make the rich richer and the poor poorer. The benefits of economic growth have not been evenly distributed, leading to resentment among those who feel left behind. Tension with the local priorities. Balancing global obligations with domestic needs can create tension. India often faces the challenge of balancing its commitments to international agreements with the needs of its domestic industries and population. So, for example, ang pressure to reduce the agricultural subsidies to comply sa World Trade Organization rules can affect Indian farmers that can lead to protest. So in conclusion, globalization's impact on peace in India offers opportunities for economic growth, improved governance, and international cooperation, but it can also lead to conflict.